The case of cage-free eggs in Canada. In 2016, Egg Farmers of Canada, which is the National Egg Marketing Board, announced that producers would be transitioning from conventional cages to cage-free housing options over the next 20 years. They updated their housing regulations to be a world leader in the housing system and the regulations and all the handling rules, very progressive stuff. They started offering resources and guidance to help producers transition into these new housing systems. All great work that was being commended for. But what do you think prompted this move? This was a huge shift. Some might think that the industry was finally responding to the public rejection of conventional cages, but the industry had been arguing for conventional cage use or battery cages for a long time. Trying to explain and educate people on why battery cages are used, why they work, all the benefits that come with battery cages, conventional cages. So why were they suddenly changing their mind? Were they suddenly being like, oh, we've learned something new. We agree with what everyone's been saying. They are terrible. There are better options for animal welfare. There are better options for environmental protections and control. There are better options for improved egg quality or consumers, or the list could go on and on and on. And to some degree, these might be true, but I'm of the opinion that it wasn't actually a decision that the Egg Board made at all. You might remember shortly before this huge announcement came, a couple of fast food chains, started advertising that they were going to be only using cage-free eggs in all of their products. Once one started, a few more jumped on, and before we knew it, most of the retailers in Canada had said, we're going cage-free. And before the industry knew what hit them, their entire market had changed. At that point, 90% of all laying hens were in conventional cages. Yet now all of the buyers of those eggs didn't want caged eggs anymore. Talk about an external threat becoming an internal weakness. And it was an external threat that the industry had been aware of. They knew that the public wasn't in support of the housing practices. They knew that. But they didn't really do anything to prep for that inevitable threat becoming an internal weakness. If we were to go back to our Porter's 5 forces and SWAT. But anyway, the point is, they were now stuck. They were like, okay, well, we have to make a decision. And let me double back for a second, because I say that there had been no effort to be made. I mean, no effort to respond to that threat from like a centralized, organized level. There were definitely farms that were starting to diversify, particularly in British Columbia. They had started to kind of develop a bit of an egg or a cage-free egg system thing. But it was very much in the early stages, and the return on that caution. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that specific case, because instead, let's consider that the board didn't make that decision, the market did. The buyers in the market made that decision. But was it actually the market? Like I said before, for years, for decades, the public opinion of egg production and battery cages was very, very low. I mean, how could it not be? When you look at those pictures of the battery cages, even as someone in agriculture, you think, oh, there must be some better way. That's not very good. So like that's nowhere near what people expect to see when they think of a hen laying an egg. They don't expect to see those battery cages. Animal welfare and animal rights groups were blasting photos across the media, oftentimes without any context. And people were shouting, "Free the bird!" And not surprisingly, eventually someone was just like, "Oh, okay. We'll do something about this." So fast food chains and grocery retailers were like, "All right, you're right. We're listening to you now. We hear you. We're going to move to cage free." It didn't happen all at once, though. It wasn't like all of the restaurant association met and said, "Okay, we're going cage free." One fast food chain said, there's an opportunity for us to gain a bit of competitive advantage. Let's make this announcement. And then after that, what were the other fast food chains to do? Either they fell in line and said, "Oh yeah, us too. Or were they going to be the ones that were just like, no, not us. We're fine with the cages. We hate chickens. All the cages." So they had to fall in line. I'll be honest, I was pretty surprised when all of the major grocery chains started also announcing that they were going cage free. I personally thought that was kind of interesting, but back to the point. Okay, so this is what the market is supposed to do, right? Respond to consumer demands. Consumers have said they hate battery cages. We don't want our eggs to be laid by hens crammed into tiny little cages. Cool. The market's working as it's supposed to. It's bound to happen. You have to be ready, on your toes. Some might say that, see, that's why we shouldn't have supply management. It makes it so the industry isn't innovative or flexible, and all of the, reasons behind that. We need to be able to respond to shifts in consumer demand. Yes and no. I would argue that this wasn't actually something that was done in response to consumer demand. They might have thought it was, but I think it's more about responding to public demand. Now, these are different. I would associate public demand kind of with public pressure. The way people, think and feel socially in terms of like their values and their beliefs don't always line up with how they make their purchases and make their buying decisions. This sentence alone could launch me into a full hour-long lecture about ethical consumption, buying practice, capitalism, consumerism, the manipulation of the populace by our corporate overlords. But I'll get back to the chickens. So Canada isn't unique in moving to cage-free. There are countries in Europe. There are states that have passed kind of state bills regarding cage-free production. California is a wonderful example. They had on one of their elections on their bill a cage-free policy, which passed with the public vote, and farmers changed their housing systems to alternative housing or cage-free housing. But as such, there was a 40% increase in cost of production, which meant there was an increase in the cost of California-produced eggs. Here's the rub, though. Well, I guess there are two. First, eggs are the cheapest and most nutritious source of animal protein. Okay? Two, there are no restrictions on out-of-state imports of eggs. So if you go to the grocery store, you're on a budget, even if you're not on a budget. If you go to the grocery store and you see two identical items, one is 40% more expensive than the other, what are you going to choose? Maybe if you are passionate about animal welfare, you're educated on what this bill was, and you purposely buy local, you would probably buy the more expensive eggs. But most consumers did not fit that description. And as a result of the out-of-state eggs selling more than the in-state eggs selling, a lot of egg farms in the area suffered. They would have just undergone quite a big capital expense to transition their housing. Then they weren't able to get the profit margins on the eggs. And a lot of small farms closed. Actually, a lot of mid to large farms closed as well. And, that can then get into issues with stability in the local food supply chain, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, hopefully, throughout my story thus far, you've been able to recognize a few elements of sustainability, with probably mostly social and economic. But maybe let's talk a bit about the housing itself, because that's what it's foundationally about, right? Improving the system for the better, for the long-term good. I mean, because when we change any system, even when it's, a single commodity group, when we change it, there's bound to be moments of discomfort as we adapt to the change. But the intention should be that in the long run, we will have a better system and it will be more sustainable and, good of all, including the chickens. Well, so maybe before we talk about the housing itself, let's talk about cage-free. So, again, this is one of those terms that doesn't have a universal set definition. You would think it would. If you hear cage-free, you would probably think, oh, okay, a free run or a free barn situation where the chickens are just loose in an area and, that's it. No cages in sight. But in Canada, at least, in Europe, that is the case. In the EU, I'm not sure if it's all of EU or if it's... Anyway, I'll link the paper. I wrote a paper a while ago. I'll include that. Like I said, it was a while ago. But in the EU, that is kind of the belief. No cages. A cage is a cage. I'm pretty sure that was a quote from one of the articles. A cage is a cage. They are truly cage-free. But in Canada, we consider the enriched housing, notice I said enriched housing, to be cage-free. And not everyone's jazzed about that style of defining the term. But that falls under the cage-free definition. So those are the three alternative housing options, and then you have conventional housing. There are pros and cons for all of them, but when we look at it from a sustainability lens, so accounting for the economic, social, and environmental aspects, they are not created equal. And I will also include a really good article that does a full comparison of the measures of sustainability across the housing systems. But the long and short of it is the best option for the economic return for the farmer and cost for the consumer, the environment, and the welfare of the hens is the enriched housing. So the enriched housing, it depends. They can look like large battery cages, very similar to the conventional cages, except they have roosts, dust baths, lower stocking density, scratch posts, and litter. So essentially, they are designed with animal welfare in mind to allow for the 5 freedoms. I think you all will have done at least one course on that discusses the 5 freedoms, but if not, just search 5 freedoms of animal welfare and you'll get taken to lots of materials. So that's how those cages are designed. So it's a benefit for the hens. Now, some would be like, well, if they're still in a cage, how is that better than being able to go out, freely as they would in nature, or, have all of the space of the entire barn? Lots of reasons. But I'll pick some of my favorites. With the free run situations, or free range is outside, which would mean that they are at risk of predators, at risk of contamination, of that they can get sick, contaminating any waterways or any of the other areas with their waste is very high in ammonia and nitrates. The free run situations, which is the free barn, open barn, it very much negatively impacts the human staff or employees, quality of work, quality of life. Chickens are gross. So really poor breathing conditions, no matter what sort of ventilation you have. They're not very good breathing conditions. It means that there is a higher, in both of these free systems, higher labor requirements, greater risk of injury to the hens. They get heel splints. They're also cannibalistic. That's the other thing, because chickens are, raptors essentially, and they will kill and eat each other. And so that's another risk, not only for the welfare of the animal, but also for the economic return, because those are all variables that the farmer no longer has control over, and lack of control means lack of efficiency, which means reduced sustainability. There's very little control for the waste of, I said I was going to do a long and short, and I'm not. Anyway, you can read the article if you're wanting to see more or hear more. The enriched housing is the better housing system, and they were able to rebrand essentially. So instead of it being an enriched cage system, it's an enriched housing system. And earlier I mentioned animal welfare and animal rights. I personally have quite a wide separation of the two, and then PETA's way over there somewhere. But animal welfare activists are in support, for the most part, of the enriched housing, because they are better for the hen's quality of life. Then, there's other problems with the other systems regarding egg quality and feed efficiency, because they're not able to manage what the chickens are eating or monitor what the chickens are eating, so they don't know when someone's deficient and when someone's not. If they're out grazing and scratching for food, the term pecking order is pecking order for a reason. The flock pecking order has a hierarchy. So if you're at the bottom of the hierarchy, you're less likely to have access to the food that you need to produce, good quality eggs, which then means you're getting a lower return on your eggs. Anyway, enriched housing. That is the way that most people are transitioning. So with the housing units themselves, that's where we can kind of start to see the environmental issues in terms of the sustainability aspects. And I mean, there's definitely environmental issues outside of just the housing of egg production. There's so many other facets that have some level of environmental control, sustainability. But within the caged systems, including enriched housing in that, the producers are able to have a very high level of control over the waste, the use of resources, reusing the waste to generate energy through maybe an agricultural anaerobic digester, or composting for fertilizer and then feed production, and putting it back into the system, yada yada yada. Well, essentially that is my case presentation about cage-free eggs in Canada, sort of addressing some of the kind of social, cultural issues that then have inarguable impact on the economics. And a lot of the time, that's where these decisions are made. That's as far as the lens goes on, this is what society wants / needs. This is the market economic response. And, that's it. But when we consider our larger nested model, then we have those other elements. And I think I would probably put the hens just at the cusp of environment and social. I think it would probably depend on the person where they see the animals in that system. I know the nested model had, I think they had animals in the environment, but I would argue that maybe I think they're in a little bit of both, particularly because animal welfare is kind of a social issue. Anyway, open for feedback on that. All right, well, I'll wrap it. I guess 30-minute podcast instead of a 12-minute mini lesson. It's not 30 minutes. We can still call it a lesson, just not a mini lesson.